So there was a Munich conference recently, within the last couple of weeks, and the chairman of the Munich conference, uh, when it was over, apparently after, I guess, some of the Trump administration had made speeches, and Trump, I believe, has accused Zelensky of starting the war in Ukraine, or or of provoking the war in Ukraine. So this chap gets up and says in German English, he says it's terrible because he thought that there were common values and principles in Europe, European common values and principles, and that these were now being rebuffed by probably by America. I don't have the exact context. And so, what principles and values are those? Are they democrat? I suppose they'll say, well, they are democratic principles of and values, and and in other words, the war in Ukraine is about Russia's lack of those principles and values. In other, which makes it so that what defines it as distinct from, say, George W. Bush, who started two wars, particularly the war in Iraq, for which there was no pretext. There was absolutely no cause for him to go into that war. Or the one that was a lie, and the reason that they would say behind closed doors is actually against international law. Regime change is against international law, and that was always the the deeply felt and possibly sympathetic motivation, but it's against international law. So you have Putin, who is a dictator for life, I guess. That's the best that can be said. Who's installed himself in power, and like those Eastern potentates do, they stay in power until they drop, and they murder all their whatever. I'm just distinctly about the wars. W. Bush started an illegal war on less pretext than Putin did, and so which Europe largely supported. The Bush War, the Iraq War. But the Europe's principles and values are anti-Putin. Understood, absolutely understood. The point here is that there's a dispute over what's going on of Ukraine, existential dispute about Ukraine. Understood, totally understood. And to date, it's been fought over young, not so young men and women. People have been killed. Lots and lots of people have been killed. And the alternative to the killing of people is that we try and talk our way out of this thing. So I guess a European principle and value must be that it is impossible to negotiate with a European country, which is Russia. That's their value. Their value is we are the free democratic West, and they are the vile totalitarian East kind of thing. How new that is. So that's okay. So we're all supposed to be on the side that's against all that. And let's just say, for the sake of argument, I'm against that. I'm against that. I don't believe it, but I'm against it. I don't believe I don't believe that we have a democracy that I would call a democracy, and I don't believe, in a sense, all states are democracies, and if Putin was awful, the Russians would have gotten rid of him, unless the Russians are also evil, which we then get into European principles and values. European principle and value number one, Russians are evil. Like Rachel Maddow's principle and value number one. All of that may be true. My thing is just, if you have negotiations, people are not dying? Why are you so keen on people being killed as per Gaza? And somebody cryptically pointed out that Gaza is being invaded by Gaza was being terrible crimes are being committed against Gazans. So Gazans stand in for Ukraine. Russia stands in for Israel. The people who are pro-Gaza are therefore the people who are pro-Gaza are disputing an invasion from the outside, but at the same time, they're supporting Putin coming in, if you see what I mean. So there's a confusion there. And I'm like, no, I understand. Absolutely. Terrible things are being done. The only difference is the means of resolution. That's all. And to imagine that because you stop funding wars, you are somehow taking up the banner of one of the sides in the war against the other, it does not follow. You're saying there's another way of resolving these issues. So this is called Back to Troubled Waters, if I feel like it. The German election, Conservative Christian Democrats, 28%, AfD, which is the very, very right-wing party, 20%. The Linke, which is left, I believe, I think is at 9%. To name three, there are 4 or 5 others. The rest of the parties refused to make a coalition with the AfD. Again, the same thing. Their leader is a white German lesbian. AfD's leader is a white German lesbian whose partner is Sri Lankan. That's not consistent with what their philosophy is supposed to be. It's supposed to be anti-gay and anti-foreigner. So I ask about, without judgment, how refusing a coalition is democratic. Now, I went back on this a little bit because, they're still in their version of parliament. The AfD has the seats that reflect their share of the election. So they are, in a sense, they're in a coalition. They're going to go into this room and they're going to argue a lot. So that's the best you can do, really, with this form of democracy. I love democracy a lot. Small d, it's as much a part of my work as I can make it. And typical of my version of it is much more about participation than the results. I think that every person is, to my mind, is a notion of as many people as possible speaking their own minds. And the use of this is not just that it's fair or allows you to judge public opinion, but it actually deepens and dignifies the speaker, the participant. It minimizes the sense of persecution we seem so preoccupied with. But it seems that others have a very different definition, which is fine. The one we have, I'd not call a democracy. It's a system of electing representatives who represent elites, are often of the elites they represent. If we have a marvelous democracy in the West, in the United States, in England, why do we have the greatest income inequality ever and growing? That's just not consistent. It just isn't. It is making serfs of many of us, and serfdom is not where democracy exists at all. So you put those two together. Are those your values and principles, Europe? Elon Musk and people like that. The Trump administration has been accused of being anti-democratic. I think it is, but it was elected democratically, what you call democracy. I don't think the Democrats are democratic, which in a sense is why they lost the election. I think they will lose more for a long time simply because America has failed to be pluralistic. The right hates minorities, their scapegoat. The left hates the right and condescends to minorities. Condescension is a real problem, maybe the problem, not because leaders do it, but elites do it. It is how elitists encounter us. They are the professional management class. They walk up to you and say, you know what you should do? Is there common ground? Masses, I can say that because I personally have almost zero common ground with either, except the great common ground, which is the ground we all walk on. Democrats will continue to say Trump is undemocratic. He is, and the AfD is fascist. It is, I guess. You know, with a lesbian, with a Sri Lankan lover. So we will not make a coalition with them. Our response to the undemocratic is undemocracy. I didn't begin to question this ideologically. I moved away because I don't feel any affinity. When I gaze upon the world, I don't naturally identify a community. I don't espy or select my own. After long years, I have discovered the like-minded. I have not discovered the like-minded, except in my work in the theatre, for sure. And even those assumptions are falling away. There's nothing wrong with this. It's just realization. I feel no grief. Hostility comes at me, which I deserve existentially, because I'm saying, no, I don't belong to you. I am I belong to all of us. Or I'd not feel this way, but groupthink is not democracy. If the AfD and the Christian Democrats in Germany find no common ground by my definition, there is no democracy possible. There is a kind of monoculture only. I have been in monocultures in the last couple of years, and it's a shiver, man. It's just not fun. It's just not. I can't even quantify it. I really can't, but it's to qualify it. It's just, or a wish to eliminate the other, and maybe this is why we look so like the 1930s. And it seems there's no way out. If a community defines itself, for instance, by saying there are only two genders, how does one respond? Me? They are ridiculous. Not so much in their judgment, which is just sad to me, but in their need of that judgment. And the furore that surrounds it, the strife, is all about which of the agreed two we belong to. So the bigotry of only two is not the issue. It is how we define each. I remember years ago reading an autobiographical bit by Marlon Brando describing his competition with other men. It seems he was reflecting what they brought, reacting against. Is that here? Is the fascism of the right creating an opposition but equal response on the left? Or is Nazism, etc., just beyond the pale, the step beyond, when the human becomes extremist, as if by nature born that way, and the rest assume that this group is irredeemable and so become like them? All questions here. Is it the Hamas story? Something evil motivates them. Their actions are not a response to injustice. It seems to me one or the other. Thomas Jefferson's judgment of Africans was fixed. He fixed it as they were inferior. He began with they were other and then concluded they were inferior. It's not a singular belief, it's a choice based on his need. He couldn't be him without that belief. It meant a lot to him. He certainly couldn't be rich enough to have leisure to write all that stuff, which was saturated with his belief, a predisposition shared by his apologists ever since. To give a gist of my democracy, it is unattached to capitalism. It called for a moment on 9/12, the day after 9/11, like the moment in The Godfather. Call a meeting of the five families, no reprisals, this war stops now. When the crowd booed Hillary Clinton in West Virginia for saying mining was obsolete, she might have canceled her flights, ordered sandwiches and coffee, and talked it out with the miners all night. After installing in 2020, the Democrats could have conducted town halls in red states, inviting only local Republicans to have it out. We are accepting this schism, this division in our culture. We're just accepting it, and we're feeding off it. MSNBC becomes Fox from the other side. Instead of condemning Bernie for going on Fox News and convincing the town hall audience of our need for state-funded health care, nominating him for president, or not scuttling his campaign. Yes, the Russians could have done it, the enemy could have done it, the Republicans could have done it, but they didn't. Doesn't mean it doesn't need to be done. to be honest, I don't know where this leaves me. My democracy is about confrontation, persuasion, collectivism, coalition, common ground, and collaboration. Recognizing even though I have no God, I am not irreligious. My democracy is not about identifying an enemy and defining oneself therefore, though I might be a victim of that trespass against me. I just can't do it. The democracy I'm looking at only has war as outcome, which is all it's ever had. Maybe it's a Greek thing. They lurch from democracy to tyranny and back again. I think the tyranny was the natural state, with bouts of democracy breaking out like ice hockey games. Our definitions are so dependent on an enemy to contrast us, to define us, we can never shake the tendency. And I had a back and forth with a guy on Substack today because I make criticisms of Western civilization, and he says, well, give me an alternative, and which I had already done in my original post, which he was responding to. And I ended up just saying, look, I just don't believe in a singular superior system. And then he said, he closed with saying, and of course we are the best. It is the best system. And I thought, yes, über alles. You know, I don't know why, I don't know how, what kind of person you have to be, and so many of them are men, but I guess there's women too, who are so convicted along the lines of my system, the system that I live in, the political system I live in is the best. You have a good system or a bad, you have a good life or a bad life. Increasingly very large numbers of Americans are having a very bad life, whatever the system is. You know, the claims that capitalism raised so many people out of poverty, well, subtract China then. If you're going to make that math, you have to subtract China, and then the figures fall off precipitously. Precipitously.